a game of teamwork and betrayal, where crewmates work together to complete tasks before one or more imposters can kill everyone aboard. You must attempt to prepare your spaceship for departure, but you must beware, as one or more random players among the crew are frauds bent on killing everyone. There is a saboteur among us, but will we recognize them in time? The plot of the computer game Among Us is nothing new, and it existed long before LAN parties were ever heard of, let alone cross-platform internet play. Those of us who are older may even remember playing an almost identical game with a pack of cards, which in our youth group we called Mafia, where villagers had to work out who the mob mafia were before they all died. Fiction and fable are also replete with the same idea of a character in disguise. The incognito character is sometimes the hero and sometimes the villain. From Nanki-Poo, Padme Amidala and Aragorn, to the Kingsmen, Alex Rider, Jason Bourne and 007, to the big bad wolf as Red Riding Hood's Grandmama and Wile E. Coyote in a Roadrunner mask, adopting a disguise is a common motif. And then, of course, we have the stories of the Chinese Emperor Kangxi, of Nero, Louis XVI, Henry V and Richard the Lionheart, who are alleged to have gone out and about dressed as commoners to mingle and drink with their people, as either fact-finding missions or simply for idle amusement. But today we'll think about another monarch who walked amongst his people while they remained entirely unaware, Jesus Christ the King. And the question will come to us, the same question as to the players in Among Us. Will we recognise him? Welcome back to the Monday Bible study on the Selah Time to Pause podcast. I'm Ian, and as you'll know by now, we're moving slowly through John's Gospel, taking our time to consider what it says to us today.
John 1 verses 24 to 26 says, "The Pharisees who had been sent asked him, 'If you aren't the Messiah, or Elijah, or the prophet, what right do you have to baptize?' John told them, 'I baptize with water, but right here in the crowd is someone you do not recognize. Though his ministry follows mine, I am not even worthy to be his slave and untie the straps of his sandal.'"
I will stop and breathe in your presence. Just breathe. Just breathe.
In his prologue, John the Evangelist, who wrote this gospel, told us that throughout history the true light had shined in promise, prophecy, holy law and inward conscience, and yet even God's people were still walking in darkness. In the fullness of time, the Creator then came to visit this world, and he was still unrecognized by his own people in his own land. This story John is telling is not the trope of the king incognito, disguised and on reconnaissance, but this is a king unnoticed. It's less than a month since churches around the world will have been reading the Christmas prophecies in their services. And in only a few months they'll read aloud the Easter prophecies. But for now we sit in the time in between his birth and his death, in the time of his earthly living. There are the famous prophecies of Jesus' birth and the famous prophecies of how he will die. But what of the prophecies of his life? Consider Isaiah.
Isaiah 53 verses 2 to 3 says, "He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not."
One of the hallmarks of Jesus' life was to be that he wouldn't stand out in a crowd. He was not going to gain great esteem because of his physical strength or height or beauty or athletic prowess or any other physical feature. Nothing in his appearance was going to mark him out as obviously divine. What would set him apart would be something entirely different. And in the very first story that John the Evangelist relates in his Gospel, he tells how, as the crowd gathered around John the Baptist, Jesus was there in that crowd, and yet no one recognized that the Messiah was there. Imagine the reaction as the Baptist tells them that one even greater than he is standing among them. Can you imagine them turning around and looking at the other members of the crowd? Could it be him? Or him, or what about that one? He looks like it could be him. We have such a tendency to judge from outward appearances, whether we will like someone or not, whether they're clever or not, honest or not, dangerous or not, worthy of our attention or not. They even used to say that in job interviews, the decision as to whether you would get the job would often be made in the first 7 seconds, before you are even asked any questions, simply based on the first impression you create. And we're not immune in the church. Even the prophet Samuel, when sent to the house of Jesse to anoint one of his sons as king, fell into that same trap.
When Jesse's son arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, here he is, God's anointed. But God told Samuel, looks aren't everything. Don't be impressed with his looks and stature. I've already eliminated him. God judges persons differently than humans do. Men and women look at the outward appearance. God looks into the heart. Jesse presented each of his 7 sons to Samuel, but none were God's choice. Then Samuel asked Jesse, is this it? Are there more sons? Well, yes, there's the runt, but he's out tending the sheep. Samuel ordered Jesse, go get him. And when he was brought in, God said to Samuel, up on your feet, anoint him. This is the one.
David, the one God had chosen, had gone unnoticed and overlooked even by his own father. The crowd around John the Baptist were religious and would have known this story, and some of them may have even remembered it at that time. So I can imagine then the crowd looking around trying to guess which among them John was speaking of, perhaps asking if anyone else knew, but no answer came. And so my mind moves on, and I wonder how they would have acted when Jesus did not identify himself. Did they start acting differently? If you were told, in a crowded room perhaps, that someone famous was somewhere in that same room as you, perhaps even standing next to you, would that change how you act? And what if you were told that Jesus was in the same room as you? Or that he lived in the same street as you, or worked in the same office, studied in the same classrooms, queued at the same checkout as you? Would you do anything differently? Is there anything you would start to do? Is there anything you would stop doing? He might not look like you might expect him to. Would you change the way you talk to those around you, in case he might overhear, in case it might be him? Would you stand a little longer holding open a door? Would you avoid beeping the horn at the driver who irritated you? Would you stop and talk and listen to and pray with the man begging at the supermarket doorway? I wonder sometimes if Jesus stands amongst the crowds today too, unnoticed and unrecognised. But then, and perhaps more importantly, I wonder if it should actually matter at all if he does. For if I would change my behaviour if I knew he was there, surely I should change my behaviour anyway. If we think back again to that video game at the beginning, the idea behind the gameplay is that the crewmates should be able, eventually at least, to be able to tell who the imposter is because something about their behaviour will give them away. If the imposter is truly carrying out their mission, then they'll not be able to keep it a permanent secret. Could the same be said of you? Will something about your behaviour give away that you're a Christian, that you're trying to live in the way that Jesus calls you to? For just as in Among Us, if you're truly carrying out your mission, then you'll not be able to keep it a secret.